Now we're going to get into a little more detail on the different hormones, and we'll start with the hypothalamus and their regulatory hormones. So there will be releasing hormones, RH, and inhibiting hormones, IH. So releasing hormones will stimulate synthesis and secretion of one or more hormones of the anterior lobe of the pituitary. They're going to cause the production and release. That's why they're called releasing hormones. And inhibiting hormones will prevent the synthesis and secretion of hormones. The anterior lobe of the pituitary releases 7 tropic hormones, and the posterior lobe releases 2 hormones. So again, the pituitary is called the hypophysis. It's a small gland in like an indentation, a cavity called the sella turcica in the sphenoid bone. And these 9 peptide hormones are from the adenohypophysis, or the anterior lobe, and these are called tropic hormones because they turn on other endocrine glands. So the anterior pituitary releases hormones that turn on other glands. And then the 2 are released from the neurohypophysis, and I wonder if you remember those 2. They came up in previously in the book. From the posterior pituitary, it is ACTH, which is antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. Now, all 9 of these hormones bind to membrane receptors and use cyclic AMP as a second messenger. So here's a picture. Here's the sphenoid bone with this cavity, and you can see the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe, and just superior to it is the hypothalamus. So we're going over the different hormones of the anterior pituitary, and the first one is TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. So by the name itself, what is the target? The thyroid gland. And what is released by stimulation? Thyroid hormones. So these are released in response to thyrotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus starts with that TRH and sends it through that portal system to the anterior pituitary, which will then release the TSH. And as with most of these hormones, control is through negative feedback. So down below here you can see all of the different hormones of the anterior lobe of the pituitary. There are 7 of them. We basically skipped this melanocyte stimulating hormone, but we briefly mention that. ACTH is Adrenocorticotropic hormone. So looking at that word, adreno, tells you it's something to do with the adrenal gland. Corticotropic, cortico means it has something to do with the cortex of the adrenal gland, and tropic means it's going to turn on a hormone. It's a turning on hormone. So this corticotropin, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, stimulates the release of steroid hormones from the adrenal cortex. Remember, the cortex is the outer part of the adrenal gland. The medulla is the middle. Just as our brain had a cortex, it's always the outer part. So these are released, this ACTH is released in response to corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is directly controlling the release of the hormones from the anterior pituitary. The gonadotropins are releasing hormones that will stimulate the gonads to release hormone. The gonadotropin releasing hormone is going to stimulate the release of 2 hormones, FSH and LH. Now, FSH was originally found in females, so that's why it's called follicle-stimulating hormone. It stimulates the follicle. Our eggs are contained in follicles, and they're immature, and as that follicle is stimulated to grow, the egg matures until it is ovulated. So it stimulates the follicle, and also is assisting in production of estrogens. Now, males have the same hormone, but they don't have the follicles. So in the males, what it does is it promotes the developing sperm. It matures, helps the sperm to mature. And this is inhibited by inhibin, a peptide released by the gonads. LH luteinizing hormone induces ovulation, and also promotes secretion of female hormones, prepares the body for pregnancy. In males, because they do not ovulate, in males it stimulates cells within the testes called interstitial cells to produce testosterone. And that testosterone is critical for proper sperm development. Growth hormone GH stimulates cell growth. And it does this by increasing the rate of protein production. So certain cells are very responsive to growth hormone, such as skeletal muscle and chondrocytes. Chondrocytes are the cells of cartilage. And growth hormone is regulated by two hypothalamic hormones, a releasing hormone and an inhibiting hormone. So the action of the growth hormone is primarily indirect. For example, the liver cells respond to the growth hormone by producing compounds that stimulate growth. And these compounds have receptors on different cells of the body, such as the cartilage and the skeletal muscle. So once these compounds are produced by the liver and go into the body cells, they cause the body cells to take up amino acids and make new proteins. The direct action would be to stimulate mitosis in both epithelial and connective tissue. In the adipose tissue, it stimulates the breakdown of stored fats, releasing them into the blood so they can be used for energy. Well, I don't think you do know actually how the mechanism works in the mitochondria to make ATP. But generally, we talk about glucose as going into the mitochondria to make ATP. But fatty acids can also go into the mitochondria to make ATP. Now, the liver is a great storage area for glycogen. Glycogen is like animal starch. Starch is just a whole lot of glucose molecules that's produced in plants, like in potatoes. In our bodies, we can't make starch. We combine all these glucose molecules into glycogen. So it's our storage form of glucose in the body. And what the growth hormone is going to do is break down the glycogen to release glucose. Glucose is our blood sugar. Another hormone is prolactin, pro before lack milk, and it stimulates mammary gland development. It stimulates milk production, and it is stimulated and released. It is stimulated and inhibited by releasing and inhibiting hormones. The melanocyte stimulating hormone hasn't been in textbooks for a long time, and now it's in textbooks. It stimulates the production of melanin, but it's not functional in adults. Now, the posterior lobe produces the two hormones that we already know, ADH, antidiuretic hormone, but antidiuretic hormone is also called vasopressin. And it's released in response to a variety of stimuli. The main stimulus is an increase in the solute concentration of blood. So what that means is the blood becomes thicker with dissolved substances. And so we would want to release antidiuretic hormone so that we retain fluids and make the blood less thick. It also it's stimulated by a decrease in blood pressure or volume, so antidiuretic hormone makes us retain fluid, so the blood volume will increase. So it acts mainly on the kidneys to retain water and decrease urination. And I don't know if you've ever had an alcoholic drink, but alcoholic drinks make you urinate more than the amount of fluid that you took in with the drink. And that is because alcohol inhibits antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin is going to stimulate the uterus during delivery of the baby, and it promotes labor delivery and promotes the ejection of milk. It also rises during sexual arousal, but this function is not well understood yet. And these are the two hormones of the posterior lobe. Which of the following is produced in the hypothalamus and released from the posterior lobe of the pituitary? Antidiuretic hormone. Which of the following is directly controlled by regulating hormones secreted by the hypothalamus? So, what gland is regulated by the hypothalamus? The anterior pituitary. As you already know, negative feedback is important in controlling hormonal secretion. For example, the hypothalamic releasing hormone triggers the release of the hormone by the anterior pituitary, which triggers the release of a second hormone by the target gland. So you can see in this picture here, here's our target gland, and it's going to release the second hormone. And that second hormone is going to feed back into the blood and will affect both the anterior lobe and hypothalamus in terms of regulating by negative feedback. The second hormone suppresses both the hypothalamic releasing hormone and the pituitary hormone. In some cases, both releasing and inhibiting hormones are part of the regulatory process. Somatomedins are released by the liver. Those are the ones that stimulated cells to increase protein production. Well, these somatomedins are going to inhibit the release of growth hormone releasing hormone and stimulate the release of growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So those somatomedins, so if you look here, the blue line is inhibition. Those somatomedins are going to inhibit, once the action is done and the hormone needs to stop, it's going to go back and inhibit the releasing hormone and stimulate the inhibiting hormone. So the inhibiting hormone is going to inhibit the anterior lobe of the pituitary. Prolactin inhibits the release of prolactin inhibiting hormone, prolactin releasing hormone, and prolactin stimulates the release of prolactin inhibiting hormone. So once you've got your prolactin that has acted on the mammary glands to stimulate milk production, and enough has been released, then it will, through negative feedback, shut off the releasing hormone and stimulate the inhibiting hormone. And this shows all of these systems that are regulated by negative feedback.